Hi guys, so it's week 8, video 2. We've just looked at Wittgenstein's rule following paradox problem, which is, just to recap, just briefly this. If you don't know what a phrase means, and someone tries to teach you what it means by giving you several examples, you can always interpret their behaviour in accordance with a completely different rule than the one they've got in mind. So the training that the person gives you in order to teach you how to use a phrase will never determine or uniquely identify the particular rule they want to get across. It can always be variously interpreted. The question is, why is Wittgenstein raising this problem? Who's it a problem for? And what's the solution? Or what does Wittgenstein think a solution would look like? So I think to get at these questions, we have to frame the problem like this. The question is this, really. Given a certain phrase, like add to, and let's say a certain case in which you're supposed to use that phrase correctly, the question is this: what makes it correct to say 1000, 1002, and what makes it incorrect to say, okay, 1000, 1004? What makes the one thing correct and what makes the other thing incorrect? That's the question. And remember, you don't already know what add to means. We're trying to explain what the phrase add to means. So it's no good saying, well, in the second case you haven't added to, because we don't know what that phrase means. We're trying to get at what it means. And in the one case it's correct, you use the phrase correctly, and in the other case you use the phrase incorrectly. And the question is, what does correctly using the phrase consist in? What does correctly following a rule consist in, as opposed to incorrectly following a rule? Well, there's different answers to this question. So you'll see in the William Child book that he proposes a couple of different answers that people give. The first response is a kind of objectivist, Platonist response, which says, using the phrase I'm adding to when you go from 1000 to 1002 is correct, because the phrase add to refers to some kind of objective Platonic rule. There's an objective, mind-independent rule out there that the phrase add to refers to. That's what the meaning of add to is. It's a kind of rule of use which is purely objective. And so if you add 4, if you go 1000, 1004, it's incorrect because you've not followed an objective sort of Platonic rule. There's an objective standard of correctness. It seems, this is what Child argues in his book, and I think that we can get into it more in the in-person sessions, but I agree with Child where he says this seems to be something that Wittgenstein is against. He doesn't think that that's the case, that the meanings of our words are correct use of the meaning of our words is determined by objective rules sitting in Platonic heaven. So I don't think Wittgenstein thinks that, nor does Child in the book. So the next option in answering this question, remember the question is, what makes going from 1000 to 1002 correct use of the phrase add to, versus what makes moving from 1000 to 1004 incorrect use of add to. So just seeing, some people think it's a Platonic rule, standard, objective standard, mind independently. I don't think that's right. And then the next view that Child puts across is a constructivist view. And it just says this: what using a word correctly consists in is whatever people say it consists in. So if everyone agrees that you've used a word correctly, you have. Because that's all it takes to use a word correctly, is for people to agree. There's no other standard. There's no objective criterion for using a word correctly. It's purely a matter of agreement between people. People make up what using a word correctly is. They say, okay, you've used it correctly, we all agree you've used it correctly, and therefore you have. If people disagree with you, or they look at you funny and go, I'm not sure you have, then you haven't. So it's constructivist because the standard of correctness is purely invented by us, rather than being some kind of objective standard, which we're trying to get at. So we have two answers here to the question, what makes it correct to use the word add to in the one case? The case from 1000 to 1002. What makes it incorrect to go from 1000 to 1004? Incorrect use of the word add to, the phrase add to. Well, the one answer is because you haven't followed an objective Platonic standard, a kind of abstract rule which you can't touch or see, but it's out there and it exists mind independently. And the other answer is to say, with the constructivist, correctly using a word just means using a word in the way that everyone agrees is correct. So it's purely a matter of, excuse me, that's my alarm, purely a matter of convention. We construct the rules. We've got these two answers to the question. They're answers to the question, what does following a rule correctly consist in? Well, Wittgenstein, some people, this is what Child points out as well, some people think that Wittgenstein is endorsing one answer of those two. So some people think that Wittgenstein's being a constructivist. He's saying there's no objective standard of correctness. And that's kind of what his paradox is supposed to bring out. There isn't an objective standard of correctness because there's always going to be unlimited interpretations that you can give on the person's behaviour who's trying to teach you how to use a phrase. So if the person's trying to teach you how to use the word add to and they carry out a certain load of behaviour, you can always make that behaviour square with any number of other rules that you've got in mind that aren't the one that they have in mind. So because you can always do that, that goes to show that there's no Platonic objective standard. There's no rule. It must just be a constructivist matter. It must be a matter of everyone just agreeing, and that the rule of add to basically is use add to when other people agree that you've used it correctly. That would be what the rule is. So some people think Wittgenstein's proposing this constructivist view. And some things he says are in line with that. That's what Child points out in the book. But I agree with Child that I don't think that that's what Wittgenstein is doing. And in the next video, I will sketch out what I think the point is of these remarks. So how Wittgenstein is opposed to both Platonism and constructivism. Okay, so just to recap briefly what we've done in this video, we've set out the problem and we've given two kind of explanations, philosophical explanations of what obeying a rule consists in. So Wittgenstein has this problem. He says you can't always be sure that when you learn how to use a word that you're not obeying some other rule. that other people don't have in mind. And then there's these philosophical explanations of what obeying a rule really consists in. One is kind of Platonist, objectivist, and the other one's so-called constructivist, because it's about what humans agree to. We construct rules. So in the next video, I'll say I don't think Wittgenstein is giving either of those answers. Okay, thank you.